Hey, I'm Sarah, and welcome back to Thrills and Kills Booktube, where I read and discuss everything dark and spooky. Today, I'm going to talk about my recent reads. This week, I read 2 books that I really enjoyed, the type of books where I stayed up late and missed out on some sleep and had to drink a lot of coffee the next day, but it was worth it because I really wanted to finish the books. Now, unfortunately, earlier this month, I read 2 books that were duds and disappointments, to say the least. I went into great detail about those in my holiday horror vlog. The following week, I sat down to read 2 other books off of my December TBR, and thankfully they were much better. Now I'm back on track and reading some good books, so hopefully I'll stay on a good streak. Now, one book I read this week was part of the Christmas readathon, so a bunch of some creators here on Booktube are hosting this month-long Christmas Evil readathon. They're even doing some live watch parties for Christmas horror movies, and it's been really, really fun. I have since read 4 of my 5 prompts. There's a little bingo board here. You can do as few or as many as you want. The book that I read this week fit the Black Magic prompt, and then I also finished a library book. I have to get that back soon, so I finished it just in the nick of time. So let's get into it. The first book that I read this week is Little Eve by Catriona Ward. Now, this is a newly published book in the US. It was previously published in the UK under a different cover, and I think it might have been her first book that she wrote. So this was being published in the US sort of out of order of the books that she has actually written. So when I was reading some reviews after I read it, it was really interesting. People who read multiple of her books were saying that they could see the evolution of her writing style between this book and her more recent ones. So I previously read The Last House on Needless Street. I think that was one of the worst books I read in 2021. I apologize. I know that's a pretty well-loved book, and Catriona Ward is a well-loved author, but it just didn't work for me. But this was being marketed as a gothic horror, sort of a gothic thriller taking place in the Scottish Highlands, and then look at that beautiful cover. So I thought, okay, let me get it from the library, and then that way if I don't like it, no harm, no foul. I haven't spent any money. So I am glad I gave it a shot. I am glad. Now, in the end, this was a 3.5 star. Depending on my mood, I could make the case that it is a 4 star, but for now, let's go with 3.5 stars. So if you're not familiar with what this book is about, we are following this insular, close-knit family, although it remains to be seen are they actually related or not, but this family that live kind of out on this island in this rundown castle that's in shambles called Altnahara. Now, I got it from the library, but I also got the audiobook with my Audible subscription because I wanted to know how to pronounce a lot of these words and these names. So Altnahara is how the audiobook pronounced it. Who knows if that's right? Anyways, we're following this family, and they are led to believe from their leader that there's going to be a giant sea serpent that's basically going to come back, and it's going to be the end of times, but that they will sort of be reborn. So it's definitely got a culty angle, so if you like cults, you might like this book. But there is an opening scene, I don't think I'm spoiling anything, there's an opening scene where someone goes to deliver something to this castle and to this family, and he finds that they are all dead, but one of the people in the family is missing. And so from there on, you're sort of seeing between differing timelines the events that led up to the deaths on this island, kind of how they were living their daily lives, their belief system, how their cult leader was able to get them to go along with ridiculous stuff, such as he was the only one who could eat a full meal. The children and women were not allowed to. So it kind of shows you how he was able to slowly take over their minds and their independence and get them to do his bidding. And then you're also following multiple points of view in future timelines that is looking back on the events and shedding light on the investigation. And then there's a twist and a reveal at the end, much like any thriller. So this is a little bit hard to categorize. It's definitely gothic, but it's also thriller. There's some historical fiction thrown in there because this is taking place in the early 1900s through the 1940s in Scotland. There are discussions of the First and Second World War and how that impacted men coming back home, if they did come back home. There is lots of poverty happening because this is in the far highlands. As I understand it, I had to kind of Google stuff. A lot of things that definitely intrigued me enough to pick it up despite my previous run-ins with this author. So overall, I definitely enjoyed it. Like I said, 3.5 star could make the case for 4 stars. So I made some notes like any good book reviewer. Now, one thing that I thought was really interesting, I watched some interviews with Catriona Ward after I read the book, and she was saying that when it comes to the Gothic, that's not its own standalone genre. I thought this was so interesting. She described it as a virus. So it kind of attaches itself to any other genre and morphs itself to fit the needs of that genre and that individual book. So I thought that was a really neat way to describe it, because there are certainly elements of the Gothic in here, but it's its own unique twist. It's not like a Wuthering Heights type Gothic book. All right, so some other things that I did like, I thought the setting was fantastic. I thought she did a really good job setting the scene, describing this crumbling castle. I could like hear the sound of the waves crashing against this gate, and the way she describes the sea life that's kind of like coming up with the tides, and when they go diving for like oysters and mussels, like I could like picture it in my head that I was there in this castle with them, or describing riding a horse along the moors into town. I think she did a phenomenal job with the landscape and just setting the scene in general. I also thought it was really neat. There is an investigation element, and we're following this detective, and obviously in the early 1900s, like the 1920s, 1930s, their forensic investigative tools and technology vastly different than what we can do today in 2022. So it was just interesting to read about how a police force might go about trying to solve a murder case and look through clues and any sort of forensic evidence given the limited tools that they had at the time. I like true crime. I've been to like true crime museums, and I read a lot of books about true crime, so that was neat. I hadn't read anything specifically like that before. The characters, I think she did a fantastic job. A lot of times I feel like if there's too many characters in a book, an author can struggle to give them each an individual voice. I feel like she did a fantastic job here, especially because you've got the family, this isolated family, but there are, like I said, there's a detective, there are other various characters out on the mainland, in town. There's a man named Jamie, a young man named Jamie, who's a pretty main character to the story, and I felt like she did a good job and spent enough time developing each of their personalities and their perspectives. However, there obviously is one main character, but like I said, the others, it's not like they fell to the wayside. They were pretty well developed. Now, some things that didn't quite work for me. I think this is just the way Catriona Ward writes, and this is not a fault against her or the book. It's just, I think, me not being necessarily the right reader for her. I felt like, especially towards the end of the book and when the twist was being explained, it was confusing. I was very confused. And now when you read a thriller, there's definitely an element of confusion, and you're trying to guess like who did it, or maybe it's this person. No, it could be that. Maybe it's that person. That's not what I'm referring to. It was just like a general confusion to the point where I was like, I don't understand what I'm reading. I'm enjoying it, but I don't know what just happened. So I did find myself a few times having to go back and reread paragraphs or sections. And especially if I was trying to listen to it, I really was having trouble. Maybe it's a me problem. I was having trouble comprehending, and then would have to go back to reading the physical book. But there were even parts where I said the confusion was so much, it was like, WTF, I don't know what just happened. Which is the same way I felt when I was reading The Last House on Needless Street, which if you've read that, given the issues with the main character, there's an even extra level of confusion and WTF, but I felt similarly to how I felt reading that book, just not nearly as much, which is why I think I enjoyed this a lot more than Needless Street. And then I just felt like I could see the twist coming from way, way off. I just didn't know how it was going to be done or how it was going to be pulled off, but it was like, yeah, it's pretty clear to me at least. Now everyone's different with that. I usually don't feel like I see the twist coming. I feel like everyone else sees it but me, so the fact that I did see it coming, I don't know what that says, if that again, is a me thing. If that's a criticism, a true criticism of the book, I don't know. But for me, those are the reasons that I'm giving it a 3.5 and not necessarily ranking it higher. Although I did very much enjoy it. I was engrossed in the book. I finished it within 24 hours. Like, I stayed up late till midnight because I was like, I want to know more what happens, despite the issues that I did have with it. So one question I do have for people, I was looking at the cover after the fact. And so see, there's like this top half, right? And you see that flag. Isn't that the, why won't it focus? Isn't that the Prince of Wales flag? And then if you flip the book over, that's the Scottish flag. So my interpretation is that there were two sets of families that laid claim to this island and this castle. And maybe that's what the flag is referring to, is those two families' nationalities. If someone else knows the answer to that, I would love to hear it, but that's kind of my interpretation. And then some other things I've been thinking about since I put the book down is I feel like it brings up the question, or at least a topic, of what is a family? Is it biological ties? Is it something else? Because they certainly operated like a family in many ways, and in many other ways, definitely not. Biological ties were not there. Is a found family the same thing? Is it legitimate, or is it only biological ties that matter in the end? And then what is it to feel like you've never had a mother? That question comes up a lot for some of the young women in the book, that they feel like they've never had a mother. So being brought up in a cult, they've been force-fed this perspective and these beliefs, this belief system. And you don't necessarily need to be brought up in a cult to be force-fed perspectives, belief systems, and it's absolutely human nature for us to feel stuck in our convictions and our point of view. Cognitive biases, if you will, and anything that we come across in life is opposed to our cognitive biases or our deeply held beliefs. It's just human nature that we can have trouble accepting that. And if we are learning about some new topic or something confusing, or hearing or seeing something for the first time, it's human nature to fall back on confirmation biases. At one point, the investigator is sort of discussing that with this main character, because she believes she has like a seeing eye. And he's trying to say, do you have a seeing eye, or did you subconsciously see something like in a crowd, and then your mind put those two pieces together along with your confirmation bias that your cult leader is telling you have these otherworldly gifts, so to say. So I thought that was really interesting, and you could interpret that in many ways and apply that to the real world in many ways, in many different types of belief systems or value sets. I thought that was neat. Okay, so that's my thoughts on Little Eve. Okay, the second book I read this week, which I actually just finished it a few hours ago, and this is the one that I read for the Black Christmas prompt for the Christmas Evil Readathon, and this is The Book of the Most Precious Substance by Sarah Gran. So you may know her. She's the author of Come Closer. That's her most well-known other work. Again, in doing some research after reading this book and reading reviews and looking up like interviews with the author, I thought it was really interesting. She recently created her own publishing company, and this is her own self-published book. Now, I do think the book is, how do I want to say this? Slightly less high of a quality as like a traditionally published book. Just some of like the pages, the weight of it feels a little bit flimsy. So if you do own this, I would say do try to be a little bit more careful than, like a hardcover traditionally bound book. But there's not a knock against it. Just if you're like me and you're really hard on your books and you kind of throw stuff around, throw it in a backpack, you probably don't want to do that with this book. It does have this beautiful matte cover though, so I think she did a fantastic job, and I hope that her publishing company is successful. Dreamland Books is the name of it. So, okay, on to the books. Trying to figure out how can I talk about this book without getting like flagged on the internet, because it's definitely an erotic book. I didn't necessarily know that when I picked it up. I originally saw a review done by Books and Lala, and then I went and bought it, and it kind of sat on my shelves for a few months, and then recently saw a review by MJ at Reading This Life, and then I was like, okay, I need to bump that up. And then I had this Black Christmas prompt that was like, dealing with like books of the occult or magic, and I was like, perfect, this is the time to read this book. So let me try and explain it to you. So we are following Lily and her friend Lucas, and they are booksellers, book dealers. Lily was previously a very well-known published author, and it has come to their attention that this book may or may not exist, and the book is called The Book of the Most Precious Substance, and it is considered the most rare but yet most powerful occult sex magic book that has ever existed. And so there is a buyer who is willing to pay millions of dollars, but they need to determine where the book is. And there are thought to be 4 or 5 copies that exist in the world, and they start going on a global manhunt essentially for this book, and they follow leads here and there, and they are finding themselves in very odd circles of very wealthy, very powerful people who are willing to do almost anything to either gain or hold on to their power, their wealth. They find themselves in various circles of people who are practicing the occult to varying degrees. Some people kind of wish to do them harm, some people are willing to help them, but it's just quite interesting to follow their journey from New York, Washington DC, Los Angeles, New Orleans, where else do they go? Germany, Paris, like it's all over the world. Ooh, and it's just pretty interesting to see them go from tip to tip to tip and meet these different people trying to track down this book. I cried 3 times during reading this book, because so you're thinking, okay, so obviously she wants to get paid a lot of money. That's why she would try and track down this book. But other than the obvious of someone just, anyone wanting to get a lot of money, what is driving Lily to do this? There has been something that has happened heartbreaking. So Lily's husband was also a writer and had early onset dementia. Like, we're talking early 40s, early onset dementia. And he is at the point where he cannot do anything for himself. He has a round-the-clock caregiver, and she has spent so much money, she's gone broke trying to get care for her husband, and he is just not there. He cannot communicate, just that he cannot do anything for himself. And it is heartbreaking to read the backstory of their love story and how it's slowly disintegrated and everything she has done and the great lengths she has gone to. And so throughout the book, Sarah Gran never outright says what Lily's motivation is, and you see Lily's like internal dialogue, what's driving her to do this, especially as their investigation, like manhunt for this book, is becoming more and more dangerous. But given the backstory you're given, that she's doing this because she wants to help her husband. And considering the book apparently will give you anything you want in the world, great power, great wealth, etc., as the reader, you're sort of led to believe, is she going to wish for his health to come back? That's why I cried multiple times in like the first quarter of this book, because of her going into great detail about the disintegration of this man's life and his mind, and that Lily can't do anything to save the love of her life. I'm gonna cry thinking about it, especially because I've said on this channel before, I am a nurse. I was an ICU nurse. I've taken care of a lot of people who are in that advanced stage of dementia, and to see why am I crying thinking about this? But to see their spouses like come into the bedside and still trying to talk to them and interact with them like as the love of their life that they knew, but the person, oh my God, but the person is just gone and no longer there. So it was just heartbreaking, and it was really impactful to read that. Oh my God. I normally am not a crier, but I don't know, this book just got under my skin in that way. So, all right, moving on. It definitely brings up the question of what are you willing to do and how far are you willing to go to get, your heart's deepest desire, whether that is lost love, power, money, whatever it might be. And we see multiple characters in the book and understanding and learning what their deepest, darkest desire is and why it is that they want to come, why they want to find this book. Made me think of, people, if they win the lottery, you hear a lot of times that people who've won the lottery, within a few years, like they've spent it all and their life is not actually any better off than it was before they won the lottery. So especially after I read the last chapter, I was thinking about that and like, was all of this worth it? I guess it depends on your perspective and what it is you want out of life and what you're willing to give up, because it's basically like making a deal with the devil. If you can get this book and do what you need, there's magic, so if you can do what you need to do to grant your heart's desire, was it worth it? The other thing it made me think of was, so working in healthcare, it's a pretty well-known phenomenon that if the wife or the woman in the relationship tends to get very ill, how do I want to say this? It's not uncommon that the husband will leave her because it's too much to deal with. I hate to say that, but it's true. I was taught that in nursing school, that it's a well-known phenomenon, and I've seen it myself. But the reverse of that is not true, that if the husband tends to be ill, it tends to be that the woman, the wife, will stick by them and help them and advocate for them and be with them till the bitter end. And so if you've read this book, you know where I'm going with this, and that Lily bent over backwards to do anything, and some really despicable things to be able to get what she wants and to help her husband. And in the end, was he quite grateful or what? I wanted to slap him at the end. I was reading a review on Goodreads, and I wrote this down because I was cackling. This was like a one-line review on Goodreads. Moral of the story: never go out of your way to do shit for a man. So yes, I agree, because her husband in the end was quite a dick. So some other things I really liked: the writing. It was just beautiful and heartbreaking. Like I said, even thinking about this book makes me want to cry again. So I think that really speaks to just how powerful the writing and the storytelling is in this book. I liked it much better than Come Closer. That was an enjoyable book, but it didn't nearly impact me to the level like this one did. Sarah Grand's descriptions of food were so great. I almost wonder, like, is she a foodie? Like, how much time does she spend going to fancy restaurants? Because these people were constantly going to meet with prospective buyers or people who kind of knew where the book was, and they were constantly meeting over meals, but it wasn't like, oh, let's go to Starbucks and meet over coffee. No. Great detail of the food and like the garnishing on the food and the sides and what kind of wine they were drinking. It made me so hungry reading this book. Great job. And the characters as well. They were all so quirky. Every time they were following up on another lead. So you have to imagine these are people who are in the book selling world, so book nerds, that's a certain level of quirkiness, but then also people who are into the occult. And she's finding herself within various circles of the occult, dominatrix circles, that sort of thing. So all of these people are quirky. And I just loved reading about these different characters, particularly like the last third of the book when they're in Paris and they're really getting close to getting this book of the most precious substance. I just loved reading about the different, especially the female characters. Sarah Grand did such a phenomenal job with the female characters and making them all distinct, independent characters. There were a few things that didn't quite work for me, which is why I'm giving it a 4-star. I wish that there had been more of the occult, but like more a dark side of the occult. There wasn't as much as I was hoping to see. That's okay. It was still very good. And then I did think it was a bit unrealistic. So they're meeting with people who are like the Jeff Bezos of the world. These very, very powerful, rich, famous, well-known, usually men. And they would send emails and be oh, you've got a meeting with this person tomorrow. Oh, yeah, we definitely want to meet with you. So some of that obviously is because the mystique and the intrigue of this book being so rare that people want to get their hands on it. So if they know there's book dealers out there trying to find it, but it just felt a little unrealistic. But I get why that needed to happen to keep the book moving. Other than that, I really enjoyed it. Now, this is a bit of a spoiler again. At the end of the book, it is revealed who actually wrote this book in the 1600s. So all along you're thinking it was one person, and then at the end it's revealed that no, a woman wrote this book. So I cannot go into detail about what the substance is. Just know it has to do with sex and various bodily fluids that may or may not occur. And obviously, the book obviously had to have been written by a woman. Let's just leave it at that. If you know, you know. If you've read the book, you know what I'm talking about. Okay, a man could not have come up with that. So we'll leave it there. Anyways, those are 2 fantastic books that I read this week, what I enjoyed about them. So I am hoping that the rest of the month is gonna go out on a high note, like with these 2 books. Let's keep it going. I have one more book that I need to read to finish up my Christmas Evil Readathon bingo board. And then from there, it's probably gonna be some short stories, like Christmassy ghost stories. So I've read 48 books. I need to read 2 more this month to hit my goal of 50 for the year. And yeah, then it's gonna be Christmas. I'm gonna be making prime rib. I'm so excited. For me, like me and my husband don't do gifts for each other. We just go all out on the food and cook ourselves a very special meal that day. That's everything I have for you guys today. Let me know what you've been reading recently, and hopefully you've been enjoying your books just as much as I have, if not more. So thanks guys, hope you have a happy holiday.